You are listening to Sirva Soundbites, the official podcast of Sirva, a leading global relocation management and moving services company. Let's get started.
Hi, welcome to Sirva Soundbites, where we aim to connect, inform, educate and entertain our listeners. I am Luke Innocent, VP of Account Management at Sirva, and today we are joined by Mark Cooledge. Welcome back to the show, Mark. Could you quickly introduce yourself for our listeners?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me again. So my name is Mark Cooledge. I'm Director of Global Supply Chain with Sirva Relocation based in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. So the last time you joined us on Sirva Soundbites, you talked about the definitions of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, what it encompasses, why it's important, and how talent mobility can support ESG objectives. So ESG strategies enable businesses to navigate the shifting tide of sustainability. By integrating environmental considerations into their operations, companies can reduce their carbon footprint, conserve resources, and contribute to protecting the planet. So environmental elements are probably the one that is most visible to the average person and likely where we'll spend most of our discussion today. So we've got a changing stance on ESG from the new administration in the White House, just as we at Sirva start gathering more data on our ESG programs related to the relocations we support, and ultimately seeing those lofty ambitions we had of being carbon neutral by 2030. Are they still realistic? Are they still achievable? So diving straight on in, Mark, has ESG died on the vine a bit?
Well, let's kind of go back in reverse order with those. So if we start with the G, the governance, that's definitely not going away. We're constantly seeing the entrance, the interest and in compliance and regulations and PII controls and things like that. That's not going to go away. And then if you think about the S, the social one, when you're talking the DE and I space, that is one that it's a little bit kind of controversial right now, maybe in a shifting pattern right now. But I think there's so much more to the S in there. There's around labor laws and fair practices and modern slavery and things like that. That's the kind of things where I think they kind of blend in with the G, with the governance piece, and that's I don't think going to go away as well. But I think the E, that's the interesting one, where you have a mix of maybe a little bit of a shift in the U.S. in the government interest, but when it comes to like the private space, the corporate space, there's still a great interest there, and obviously in the rest of the world, this is still a go forward, very important topic. So I think that's probably the best to stay with the kind of the environmental piece for today.
No, it makes sense. And so sticking to the environmental piece, do you feel over the past year or so that the narrative has shifted?
I would say yes and no. The majority of companies haven't really started or are just getting started on their environmental journey. There is a number of companies that are really far along in this process, and I'm talking both the corporate side down to the supplier side. And then you have some that are, again, just kind of getting interested in this, just getting started. And I think what we've seen in the last, let's just say in the last year since we talked, there's been this kind of wave of interest, but there's maybe a bit of naivety.
And where do you think that naivety has come from?
Well, I think, when we get started on our environmental journeys, it's common to come in, you get all excited, you have these grand ideas, these big ambitions, and what I like to call marketing sustainability. You have these aggressive goals, and we're guilty of that as well. We came out with a statement that we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030 a few years ago. I can tell you now that we kind of know what we know now. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's something we're going to need to revise.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can think of most governments around the world are probably thinking similar things when they first kind of went, oh yeah, we're going to be carbon neutral by X date, and slowly but surely they're kind of like, okay, how do we get that infrastructure in place? How do we make all of this work?
Right.
So yeah, it's, as you say, a bit more realism coming into effect now.
I'm sorry, real quick. So I saw a billboard about a couple of years ago, and it was an electric company, and they said we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050, and I laughed and I said, oh, we'll all be dead by then. So that they could have been a little bit more ambitious, but now I look at it and I'm thinking, okay, actually that was actually probably a more fair statement. So
It's that shifting perspective, isn't it?
Hmm.
So when you kind of reference that the narrative shifting, where do you think those things are coming? What do you think is shifting the narrative for companies?
I think it's part of the journey. So, some companies are putting a lot of efforts and knowledge and money into their programs and have truly made great programs. And this should be applauded, and this is still the goal. But if you think about it, going back to the power, if you're in mining, or if you're like, for example, an airline, and over 2/3 of your GHG emissions fall into Scope 1 emissions, what do you do? It may be, again, airlines could be 90% of your output is jet fuel related.
Yeah, I was going to say there's only so much you can do in that space.
Right.
Although I do, recently read that at least the aviation industry is now looking at other alternatives, sustainable aviation fuel, which sadly always makes me think a little bit more of Back to the Future, where they're actually using municipal waste, cooking oils,
Right.
plant oils, and waste gases, and somehow they're making that work to power their engines and get the planes around the world. So, but yeah, to your point, there's how far can they take that without actually saying, okay, some sort of offset or an alternative is needed.
Exactly.
Which I guess, some of that plays back into the whole technology element and things. So do you think it's greater awareness of the environmental impact that actually creates new challenges for companies?
Yeah, I think that's really the challenge for many. You don't want to put yourself out of business. I mean, if we're sticking with like the airline analogy, they are reliant on technology advances for a lot of things. They're I don't think we're going to want to get into an electric airplane. Not something I would want to do right now. So what you have to do, and then in the case of like, Sirva and relocation, we move people, and that's moving goods from place to place. We don't want to stop doing that because we'll put ourselves out of business. But there are little things you can do. And again, like airlines, they're looking at something I read about when I was learning in the space is there's these things called contrails, which are those pretty little clouds that follow an airplane in the sky, and you think they always look so nice. Apparently what they actually do is they actually kind of reflect sunlight back into space and create this like heat blanket. What they do is they're studying how can they avoid certain flight patterns where they can avoid the creation of those contrails. But again, with them, with us, with shipping and trucks and stuff like that, there's a lot of dependencies on technological breakthroughs to make a big difference. Obviously you want to still grow your business, but still be concerned about the environment.
So it kind of comes back to that infrastructure piece. And if we have the money, the investment, then potentially these things can happen a lot swifter.
Yeah.
But ultimately, maybe that's why the 2030 goals maybe not so realistic when you think of the infrastructure behind it.
Exactly.
So it is an interesting one. Yeah, no, good. So ultimately, where can we build up that awareness? How can we get people more aware of where do the emissions come from? How do we decrease carbon footprints?
Yeah, I think, and again, that's going back to kind of that ambitious piece. When you kind of get started and you're thinking, oh, I have all these grand plans, and you start with the simple things, planting trees and recycle, and turning off the lights and things like that. But it's really, and everybody's path is going to be different. But ultimately for us, it was measuring. So once we started measuring our scopes 1, 2, and 3, and you really start digging into the data, you start looking at the segmentation of the where the numbers are coming from, where the impact is. That's really where you build that awareness, and that's really where kind of the understanding of this is a more challenging problem than you go into from the beginning.
So you mentioned there that we've started measuring all of the scopes last year at Sirva, pulling together some of that data. What have you seen from the data? What does it show?
So we started measuring with 2023 as our baseline year. So we have now 2 years worth of data. And one of the telling observations, at least for me, it was when we look at all our where it falls in the spectrum of scope 1, 2, and 3. We have cases where we own our own trucks in certain markets, like in Australia, where we're actually doing the work, and in some cases third party. So whether it's falling under scope 1 or scope 3, the moving piece of our business was about 70% of our output. So that's a huge piece there. And then you look at things that other areas where you thought were much bigger kind of footprint areas aren't as much so. So that kind of changes the dynamics as far as how you think about this.
I guess not too surprising, considering that I was going to say a large part of our operation is in the household goods space, in that moving space. So yeah, I guess that commentary doesn't surprise me. But obviously, we don't want our customers, our clients, to stop moving, stop using us. That's not great for our bottom line. So what else did we see in the numbers?
Well, then, so I specifically are working in the kind of the relocation supply chain piece. So that's kind of more my specialty. Again, working with the household goods team as well. But I thought that the kind of the area of my space, my world, or whatever would be a larger percent, and actually was closer to about 10% of the total output. So it's again, so if you take 10% of the relocation out, the kind of the relo suppliers, then 70% is the moving operations. Right there, you're at 80% of all of our outputs, the majority of our outputs in those two areas there. So there's basically, then you can kind of segment out our information into three large buckets, and then you can start getting into the details as far as what you can do in the rest.
Interesting stuff. So what is Sirva planning on addressing the environment now that we have, I'm going to say, some better analysis on what our numbers look like?
Yeah, okay, so I think if we look at this in two ways, let's start with the corporate side. So corporate meaning service. So we have to look at Sirva, what can we do and at what pace? So again, I was talking about, whether it's the business travel, employee business travel or commuting, or the office footprints that we have, or in the direct operations of, delivering the household goods, things like that. We can, what can we do and how quickly can we do it? We do have regulatory obligations in certain countries and where we have offices, and so then we have to have certain commitments and meet certain targets in those markets. And that's actually a challenge too, because if you think about it, Sirva worldwide, we have so many different offices around the world, and so we can't necessarily say, okay, Sirva has to do this. It's Sirva here has to do something, but then we have Sirva Netherlands has to do this, Sirva Australia has to do this, Sirva China has to do that, and it may vary by office and by region. So that's kind of where we're looking at right now is what can we do in that big and the little, and that can be a challenge because you're kind of, you have to really shift your brain as far as what's in scope for this particular area that we're looking at. And then for our clients, this is actually the part that I get really excited about, and I tend to talk to a lot of our clients about. Now that we have 2 years worth of data, this is where we can really kind of start getting some interesting insights. We'll have the ability to look at the impact by service, by region, by policy, kind of any way you want to slice the data. We can kind of take this information again with 2 years worth of data, then we have a little bit more of a trend. Obviously, the further along, the more years we get under the belt, then we'll be able to fine tune that. But again, that first year was interesting because we had these big numbers. But now that we have 2 years, it's like, okay, you can see, okay, was it something specific to happen that year, or is it kind of a trend? And then we can again look at it by by client, by industry, things like that. So that's where it really gets exciting. Kind of I think we can make some kind of quick progress and kind of do some fun things in the industry.
I was going to say, and that analytics is where it starts to get really interesting.
Right.
Obviously, as we progress into the third year of data, etc., you can then really drill into, okay, what are the trends? We certainly notice things going up, down, but now you can, I was going to say 2 years is great, 3 years will be even better. It'd be interesting to see what we can identify in amongst that data. So what about carbon offsets or other offsets that we can draw down on?
That's you call that marketing environmentalism, or at least that's what the hardcore perspective would say. That is a buzzword. You tend to kind of, the higher you go in the company, the more common you hear that word. And again, it's not, there's nothing wrong there, but again, once you start kind of learning about what is involved in this whole space, you realize that offsets are essentially what they are is they're a carbon accounting method to reduce your outputs from your books. So it's kind of like a write-off. The analogy I always use is the leaf blower. So you're out there and you see your neighbor, or maybe they have like a service company out there, and they're blowing debris off the yards out into the street, and that debris, that dust is still there. It's off the property, it's off your property or their property, but it's still there. And so then that dust becomes someone else's problem. And then eventually that dust is going to blow back into the person's yard. It kind of goes everywhere. So offsets, I think, are not really a solution. They're more of a quick way to, if you do want to get to carbon neutral by 2030, yeah, you can basically just write a check, send those that imaginary carbon output that's somewhere out in the space that you don't really even own anymore, so to speak, but you're responsible for. You can get rid of that, but then you're just writing money for the sake of making your books look greener.
And just hope that someone else plants all the trees that
right
that is required
in some other part of the world that doesn't impact you, etc. So
yeah. I mean, it's kind of, I guess, when we talk about relocation policies and things, it's similar to where we've got clients where they kind of foregoing household goods shipments, and they're making that decision of kind of, oh, it's fine, we'll give people a furniture allowance instead. It's a more carbon neutral. It's better for the environment. It's a better way to go. Not really thinking, well, hang on, the new goods that your employees are going to be purchasing in their new location, they've been shipped. They're going to have a carbon footprint. It's very rare these days for us to be able to go to the local store, buy furniture that's been locally crafted, locally made.
Using recycled materials.
Has been shipped from somewhere else in the world on a big container ship, just the same as their household goods would have been.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of, you think even through policy design, you're like, oh, I'm making sensible environmental decisions, when the reality is, in the bigger picture, are you? You're kind of, to your analogy, getting in with some of that leaf blowing.
It's exactly the same. I mean, that's a great analogy. It's basically like doing a carbon offset by not shipping your goods. So yeah.
But I mean, I guess on the positive, at least clients, ourselves, we're looking at alternatives now and questioning policies to kind of go, is there some way we can be more carbon neutral, save the planet a little bit, and give decisions? So going back to one of my earlier line of questions, do you think companies are still interested in the environment?
Absolutely. The number of our clients that have been reaching out to us in the last, I'd say 18 months maybe, is just, it's just, it's daily. It's like getting it, more and more clients are asking us, saying, in fact, I just got another one today, from a client where they are asking questions. They're having us fill out certain questionnaires. They may be asking for a CDP or EcoVadis reports. They are putting it in their contracts. And obviously now that we have gone out and said, okay, we have numbers, here's your numbers, we're going to start digging into there. The level of excitement, I'd say, is just gone through the roof. I'm getting clients now saying, okay, how fast now can you give us this greater insight and kind of go into the greater details? So it is not slowing down. I think whatever maybe kind of the feeling or the thoughts or the media presentation from whatever, let's just say the U.S. government is saying, the corporates are still going forward in this. They're still, they've started that investment. In some cases, if they're a manufacturing company, you can't shift on a dime and stop doing something. So they're going to keep going for this and kind of still learn more. And again, what's interesting is I'm also seeing on the client side that there are some that are, again, very, very progressive, very astute. They really know their stuff. And some where it's like they kind of come in, they're just like us, where they kind of come in saying, okay, we're going to do this. And then they're like, oh, well, now that I'm learning, something, they're going to shift and stuff like that. So it's still a really strong interest. And I kind of feel like, everybody's in a different place, but again, everybody seems to be looking the same direction now.
I was going to say, so, but at least everyone's starting to mature in their journey, shall we say?
Yes.
And learning more and evolving. So what do you think, what is the motivation for being greener, for looking at people's mobility programs to make sure that, yeah, we're starting to align with some of those objectives?
Yeah, I think it's changing a little bit. So you have some that are purely looking at there's the truly the environmental impact, and then they're believe that they can make an impact and a difference for future generations. I think that's something that's there. There are some companies out there that are, or that it's more of a, okay, well, this is like an obligation. We need to do something. We recognize that the business we are in has a negative impact on the environment or the earth, and so we let's just. I want to say it's like kind of like, I'm sorry, but it's like a we feel like we have an obligation to reduce the bad, if you will, that's being done. And so, and those are both great. And I think any client or company or whatever that is focused on this, that's the important message. I think some people cynically make comments about, oh, well, they're doing maybe mining or something like that. But yeah, mining companies tend to be the ones who are most interested in this space. They're doing a lot of stuff in there. But then I think what's interesting is people forget is that there's also a shift or motivation for being greener. From the changes in the generations in the workplace. So, you have people, my age where, by the time the planet goes away, I'll be dead. So, in some ways you could say, well, who cares? But, joking aside, but then you have like my kids who are about to enter the workforce in the next, months and years. This is kind of an expectation. This is something that I think it is assumed. They've been growing up in this space and concerned about the planet. And again, it's not like a oh, we need to do something now about it. It's more like, oh, this is kind of the expectation that we should be doing something, and this is kind of the choices I make are just inherent to them. And then I think another one too with the one that's interesting about being greener is you can have green, like a greener environment with something that's actually fun. So I think of like the electric car. So the explosion of the electric car, I think when it started a couple of years ago, it was all about it was partially about the environmental piece. But then you had like the early model Teslas and stuff like that, where it was actually like a cool looking sports car. Well, now you have, these other cars that it can be a 400 horsepower car that drives 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds, which is fun. And so you have, it's just like your
A lot of fun. It's not scary, but yeah.
No, but this is your dad's sports car, but then it's electric, and you're having a reduction in carbon footprint. So the incentive or the motivation or kind of the interest in the space is not as cut and dry and not as basic of oh, I'm just doing something for the planet. There can be so many myriad of reasons why people want to be greener.
It's interesting you mentioned the generational shift, because ultimately I was on a call earlier on in the week, and it was about vendor selection. And almost one of the younger individuals on the call, that was almost the first thing that they called out, was what were the green credentials? Where did this person sit? Where did the supplier sit versus the other suppliers when it came to, okay, this is who we've selected. Okay, great. What are their green credentials? Where do they score? So are they the number one in the environmental space? If yes, then that individual suddenly became very happy. And you could see them kind of trying to argue it out for some of the others, where they're like, well, they're not green. They're not ticking the same scorecard in the environmental space. And I was just like, wow, that was the first thing that they prioritized on, was the environmental scorecard piece.
That's great.
It wasn't pricing. It wasn't the benefits. It was literally straight down to, okay, where does this supplier fit from an environmental standpoint? Which, again, for me, generational wise, I was like, okay, it's a consideration for me, but obviously for the younger generation come through, it's like, this isn't that absolute. Yep. This must be the way we're going. So which is a great way. So kind of shifting back to your car analogies. So we'll shift gears again in this conversation. What are we seeing in the supply chain space?
Okay, so in the supply chain space, I think you're confident about what the supplier is doing. This is something we do in our sourcing events. We have a very robust, very active sourcing process, and 30% of our, about 30, it's like 28% of our standard questionnaire is around ESG. And so there is, we can go in. So if you have a company that says, I want the greener supplier, we have the data on that. But then the other thing we do is we do an annual survey with our all of our third-party network, and this year was our 5th year of the survey, and this was the year I was actually really excited about this. So we launched this years ago, and we've been I've been going on the circuit, the survey you or the other yours or whatever, and saying this is something we're interested in, something we care about, something we want you to start thinking about, and the numbers in the surveys we kind of go up and down, and it's kind of just steady and stuff like that. Well, this is the year when we saw the big changes in the network. We saw the big shift in the results from the survey. So, for example, we found that 84% of the respondents have policies and controls in place to manage their environmental performance. I mean, that's huge. That was a 26-point jump from last year. So that's basically most of the suppliers are saying, yeah, we're doing something. We got something in place now. And then obviously once you start doing that, the next thing is about what can you do about formal goals or strategy and things like that. And we actually had 63% of the respondents said they have a formal goal and strategy to reach carbon neutral. And that's a 27% jump from the last survey. Another interesting number is we had a 31% increase in the number of suppliers that were formally tracking their scopes 2 and 3 carbon footprint, and that what blew my mind because I didn't think we would get to where we were that fast. And that we do have a 5-year goal for different measures, and that's one of the areas where we're looking at. And that's one actually in the scope 3 we've actually already hit that, so that was pretty cool. And then finally, we found that 44% of the respondents have a formal framework where environmental friendly options and alternatives can be presented to the customers. So going back to your comment about, okay, well, I want to have the greener supplier. It's not about pricing. This is really tying into that. So this is really asking about, okay, can you, if wanted, not necessarily forced, but if you want this, can the supplier provide green alternatives to the customer? So the customer says, I want a greener relocation. They're going to only show the LEED certified properties, things like that. Maybe they take public transportation on the household visits and things like that. And this is one of our key goals in our 5-year plan, is to get this up to 75% or more. So 44% versus 75%. 75% is it's still a long ways to go. But this is the one that I think is going to have that key impact to our clients.
And I was going to say, interesting numbers there. And do we know if there's anything in terms of the goals that they had? We mentioned our own goals of 2030. Do we have any insight as to our suppliers when they're trying to hit carbon neutrality?
Yeah, it's a mix. We had a huge shift in I think it was like a 221% increase in suppliers that have already achieved carbon neutrality or carbon negativity without offsets. Just a huge jump there.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'd say the majority are in either the 5 or less years or 10 or less years. There's still some out there that they're kind of we're thinking about it mode, but I think with that 5 to 10 year, those two groups, I mean, that was probably where the largest number of the suppliers sit. So, and that's really where we were. If you think about 5 years ago, we were in 5 years ago we came out with the 2030 number. Somebody came out with the 2030 number, and then we started having kind of more of, okay, let's do a 5-year and 2, whatever. And so you evolve again as
getting some sort of structure around it. How do we measure it? What tools are there going to be in place?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess ultimately that kind of brings us round now to talk a little bit about the clients, what we're seeing from clients.
Yeah, and I've been doing all the talking. So, and you're on the client side. So probably you're the better one to tell me about what we're seeing on the client side. What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from our clients, it's still a space that they're super interested in. It's very rare that we don't have a business review where either a head of mobility or procurement in particular ask a lot about what we're doing in this space. And I think that's really kind of trying to understand how we Serva can support them with their own journey as well. And it's kind of trying to align those initiatives that our clients have on a broader spectrum and kind of going, are we, through mobility, through their relocation program, are we heading in the same direction? Even down to what tools are we using to track all of this? You mentioned EcoVadis earlier. I know we're utilizing Sweep, both of which are getting a lot of interest from our clients because they're the same tools that they're using. Yep. It's like, oh, brilliant. You can kind of, your data is going to fit into the same landscape as what we're utilizing. And then from, I'm going to say probably a mobility program, there is that continued interest of, certainly as more younger generations come into mobility programs, of what are the different services that could be greener? What are the alternatives? I know you and I have had various conversations about how we could utilize clients' policy, change clients' policies to come up with a more greener approach, or at least something that gives relocating employees a choice to take a more environmentally friendly option around policy. So yeah, there's certainly no lack of interest in this space. I think it's where we've gone from, let's say a couple of years ago, they're like, what are you doing? Why isn't it here? We expect you to be running a whole fully electric household goods industry,
yeah.
Electric trucks, etc. Disappear with all paper, cardboard, etc. So there's a lot more realism today that we're seeing from clients. So rather than being done at a rush, it's slowed down in pace. But with that, I think has come a lot more thought process around it, which I think is really cool. So yeah, no, certainly not a topic that's gone away. And it's really now about how do we at Serva utilize the data, and how do we share it with clients so they can start making tweaks to their policies, to their programs, to what they offer their relocating employees, and ultimately, does it fit in with their wider ESG goals of their business?
Yeah, and that's where what's key for us is that, as the largest relocation company, we have the most data. So, if companies are looking at themselves, but then they're looking at themselves in the perspective of, okay, well, how does that compare? How does that, look for my industry and things like that? And that's where, for us, we have our insight reporting where we can look across industries, or by size of the company, et cetera. And that's where, I think that's where you can get some really kind of, what's different about me? Why is my annual CO2 output so different than another company that you're working with? It's the same size, same industry. What's different about it?
I was going to say those insight piece, and that almost comes back to some of the stuff that you and I have spoken about in the past around, okay, what does the future of policy making look like for companies, and how can they utilize, as you say, those insights to start changing things around, making it a little bit more environmentally friendly, but just having options. I'm going to probably steal a phrase that you use, kind of gamifying policies.
Yep.
So I'm going to delve into that for a little bit and just kind of go, what do you mean about gamifying a policy to make it more environmentally friendly?
Yeah, that's I think the one that I get really excited about. So again, this could be a generational thing. I think the interest in gamification of anything. This is basically where you're taking an activity that you do, and you're whether it's like assigning points, it's almost like playing a video game if you think about it. I saw this great thing recently from this futurist, this little video about this guy goes into the grocery store, and he's looking at the grocery stores, and there's like ads, and they're like, you can get points for buying these bananas and things like that. But you could do this for the move as well. So you could look at create a policy that is, okay, here's our standard policy, and maybe let's just say here's a green policy, and then with the green policy, again, because we have all this data, so we look at the by the service and where it is. So you're looking at let's just say a home finding in the Netherlands, and you're looking at an air shipment to Singapore, and then we know the weight, so you can kind of create this predictive numbers around what would be the impact ahead of time. I think this is where we're going in the space. Right now, we're looking at, okay, what happened? What did you do? But then once you have that data, you can start looking at, okay, what does that mean going forward? So in theory, an employee could go, on their move, and they're at a home finding thing, and they pick up their phone and they say, okay, well, if I choose that property, it's going to have this impact on my Relo green score, or if I choose that property there, if I again do the get in the electric car versus getting on the public bus versus walking, what is my score? And so you could, in theory, create leaderboards within a company that says, okay, these are all the employees, and I don't know, there's something that motivates a lot of people when it's like you're talking rankings and stuff like that. Have you ever been to one of those conferences where you attend the booth and you get points for it, and you attend all the sessions and you get points for it, and then they have leaderboards, and at the end of the day you win you win some Beat headphones or something like that. You could do this with policies, and employers could actually reward employees with achievements. So maybe they hit certain achievements and they get either some sort of a reduction in cost or something, or they get some sort of financial bonus, or there's all sorts of ways you can incentivize the employee on it. But just the gamification itself is going to be, I think, an incentive for a lot of people. And again, as we get these younger people involved, they like to check boxes, they like to get likes, if you will. There's no reason why this couldn't be done in the mobility space.
Yeah, it'd just be interesting to see how the technology kind of allows us to have that kind of experience, because already when you think about policies, your core flex, lump sum, we have tools to manage those kind of, let's say, budgets by points. We've got clients who have cash out policies, and actually, again, that's driven by points. And it's like there's no reason why some of those standard policy points couldn't be switched out for green policy points, environmental points, and kind of seeing how, okay, let's start making some flexible decisions, give it to the employee to make those environmental decisions, and actually kind of track it, score it, and see how it goes. Intra-European moves, we've got great rail networks here. There's no reason that people always have to jump on an airplane anymore. They could try and take a greener travel solution, and certainly we can start trying to track, or at least in terms of setup of a policy in a system, look at how that scores and goes from there.
Yeah.
So what else could we look at potentially for the future, for tracking, or at least laying out a policy program?
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on this. If you think about it with the like today we do cost estimate. So we whether it's a lump sum or it's a full regular move, we have the ability to cost estimates, and so you create these tools. Say, okay, well, this is this is your policy. This is what to from. Size, things like family size, things like that, and then we can come up with a cost estimate. Well, there's no reason why we couldn't actually have a carbon estimator tool as well, so that you could have both a cost and carbon estimator tools, and have those in there, and you kind of have them both. And again, for the employer that is focused on one versus the other, that's their choice. We could have that ability to share that with them, but in some actually might want to combine the two. We're hearing about companies, obviously not in the U.S., but in Europe, where they are already doing carbon budgeting. So this is where they come in and they set their annual costs of employee travel and benefits and manufacturing costs and whatever, and then a department will also get a carbon budget as well that they have to maintain certain levels. So it's kind of like the same kind of thing on the move. And then I think what you could do is again, just with the cost estimate thing, you can do you have the pre-move cost estimate, and you have a post-move actuals, and so you could do the same exact thing with the carbon costs. Did you achieve that estimate as far as the carbon cost? Did you beat it? Did you go worse? And then you could look at the whys.
Getting that kind of budget to actual starts becoming really interesting.
Yeah.
In terms of the dialogue and how you then. Yeah. But then how you kind of switch up your program and things. So I guess with such a hot trend at the moment, where can AI play a role in this space?
Oh, I knew this was coming. How did I know this was coming? Yeah, AI is everywhere, right? And it's nowhere. So I think it can. Obviously, any early adoption use of AI has its risks. I mean, there's
Mm.
what are you using the information for? Like, I think the lazy use of tools, could have a disastrous impact to your results. I mean, you're thinking about like, I'm just going to say I'm moving from Australia to, Adelaide to Singapore, and I have a family size of 2. Hey, ChatGPT, what's my carbon output going to be? It's probably not the time to do that at this point. And I think this is why.
Interesting to see what results would come back, though.
Yeah, it could be. Actually, that would actually be an interesting study, is to look at, now that we have this data, to kind of look
Yeah.
at that and say, okay, was it right? Are we are we wasting money with a formal tool? I don't believe so. I do think that there's a reason why we have these formal tools. The sweeps, the other brands out there, or the fancy ones. And there is a lot of data and thought put into their carbon emissions tools. I mean, and they are revising them. They evolve. They're shifting at as they get more information. I think of even our business. The first year that we look at temporary housing, there weren't temporary housing kind of standards. So there's the kind of the prevailing thing is you look at upscale hotel things, which is not going to be the same as a temp housing thing. Now you have groups like CHIPA that are building out formal measuring ways for temp housing, which should be in theory much more accurate than what we're doing. So as we get, as those things are developed, we can put those into our system. We can adjust our system, things like that. I don't know with AI, if it's quite that simple. Maybe it will be, and I think that's something as we see it's evolving. I think the other concern you have to worry about with AI is obviously the segmenting out your data. So it's the PII, the customer information. There is no way we're going to say, okay, these are client ABC, and and these are the all the data of where people are moving to, and we're going to stick that out into the public realm. I mean, there's certain open AI spaces where you're basically leaking all your secrets and information out to the world, which you definitely don't want to do. That's not something that would be good for our clients. But then there are things that it can work very well for. So, for example, if you're looking at distance calculations, so if you're looking at a shipment of a goods, let's just say again Adelaide to Singapore, if we actually have the actual data of how far the boat went, and maybe it had to go around a storm or something like that, that would be the most accurate way to do it. You can't one of the things we actually found in some tools is that they actually look at it from a straight line perspective. So it's as the crow flies, if you will, from Adelaide to Singapore. Well, that's not accurate either, because the boat's kind of going around, and has to go around Indonesia or something like that, and so it's not a straight line either. So this is something where AI actually can be a good use case for looking at the more accurate data, because again, it's if you tell it this is by ocean or by surface, and the same with roads. It's not a straight drive from Prague to Athens. So this is where that would be a good example. I am very bullish of the prospect of incorporating AI into kind of the collection and analysis of this, but I think there's so much going on with AI right now and excitements around there that this is probably, at a certain point we'll figure out where it works, and I think some probably have already figured this out, but it's at this point it's not like an immediate priority.
I was going to say it's just going to be about finding time, capacity to teach AI what is needed in this space to really come up with a good picture and a good story.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be mean. Are you kind of, speaking of processes, are you someone to go to learn how to build a process?
No, I don't think so. My formal background is actually is in Chinese studies, so I could explain to you about the pitfalls of the policy of the Great Leap Forward in China in the 60s. But when it comes to data and science and things like that, I don't necessarily have a formal training in there. So I can give you thoughts, I can give you opinions, I can give you these big wild ideas, things that the pie in the sky dreaming of where I think we can go. But I think as far as if you are starting on your journey, as far as what, where to learn these things, I'm probably more of a, like a information desk, a point there and go over there. And so I think there is a ton of formal available training out there. It's both paid and free. Once you sign up for some of these things, you're going to get all sorts of invitations to free conferences and things like that. With again, when we implemented Sweep, there's actually this whole built-in Sweep school in there that you have to go through all these courses and learn all this stuff, which is great. Again, I'm not a science guy, so some of the stuff I read this and I'm like, well, I have no idea what I just read, but it sounds great. And I'm sure somebody much smarter and much younger, came up with all these
I'm
things.
sure it sinks in.
Right, yeah. So somebody, as long as somebody's building the tool and validating it, that's kind of what I care about. But I think that you do this training, you talk to people, you talk to your peers, you talk to your customers, your clients. This is really where you get a better understanding of the space. I think if anything, you can think of myself. I'm kind of more like an offset than anything, than actually a true solution, if you will. So.
I like it. Cool. Well, we're coming up to time. So Mark, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for sharing your insights, the data, really appreciated. I'm sure our listeners have benefited greatly from the discussion today. But before I go, we would like you to share a top tip with our listeners. What do you have for our listeners today?
I think the top tip is to what I said earlier, just start reading, start learning, start getting that basic understanding. It's the really key is and I'm going to quote one of our suppliers. I'll go ahead and give him by name, Robert Baldwin, Pack and Peck's great guy, and apparently he maybe stole this from somebody else, but he said just start going forward, just start moving forward. That's really the key thing there. And again, as we learned from the discussed at the beginning of the call, don't expect your journey to be in a straight line. Expect it to have twists and turns. As you get more information, you can speed up, slow down, adjust your course as you go, and that's really the whole key is to be open, be flexible, and just absorb as much as you can.
Amazing. Thank you, Mark. So it's been such a pleasure to have you on our show today. Once again, to our listeners, thank you so much for listening to Sirva Soundbites. If you enjoy our show, please click subscribe and share, and be sure to come back next time. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop us a note at soundbites@sirva.com. Until then, this is Luke and Mark, and don't forget, Sirva provides everything needed to move talent and deliver experience. See you next time.